My name is Donna Little. I'm a professor at Reinhardt University. I am a writer and I am director of the Reinhardt's undergraduate and graduate creative writing programs. I got interested in this subject because it's local history and I kind of stumbled upon it. I live near White, Georgia, which was originally Wofford's Crossroads, Georgia. And I got interested in who the Woffords were. And as I started to do research, I became fascinated with their story. The most interesting thing I've found in the course of my research is that at the time of the Trail of Tears, there were intermarried Cherokee families who stayed here and passed as white. And so some of the Woffords who founded Wofford's Crossroads were part Cherokee, but they stayed here when the Trail of Tears happened, whereas others of their relatives went out on the trail to Oklahoma.
Welcome to the Bartow History Museum. It's still January, so I can still say this. Happy New Year, if I didn't say it to you. If this is your first time in the museum this year, Happy New Year to you. I know some of you came to lunch and learn a couple weeks ago. But welcome to our evening lecture this evening. We've got a special treat for you. We're looking forward to having Donna tell us a little bit about her new book. But before we get to that, let me give a few announcements. If you hadn't had a chance to see our current temporary exhibit called Handmade Homegrown, which is on the other side of this wall, do that tonight because it closes Saturday and it comes down Monday. So check that out while you're here. It's a great exhibit. We're real pleased to have that work by the Etowah Valley Hand Spinners Guild and the Peachtree Hand Spinners Guild. They did a lot of great work in that exhibit. February, we've got 3 great events coming up in February that I want to tell you about. First of all, on February the 15th, we're doing an event we call a White Glove event. Anyone come to White Glove events before? So you get a pair of white gloves, and we'll provide them to you. You don't have to bring them. They're included with your price, your ticket price. But you come to the museum on that evening, and we're going to have probably, I don't know, what do y'all think, 30, 40, 50 items out on display upstairs on tables that you get to walk around, and you get to pick them up with your white gloves. And we'll have staff there to tell you all about the items, the history of the item, the significance, what makes it unique, what ties it to Bartow County's history. So that's going to be a great event, a little bit of artifacts for everybody. So we have photographs, we have documents, we have objects, we have all kinds of different things that you're going to get to take a look at, hold in your hands, and learn more about. Also that evening, you do get wine and heavy hors d'oeuvres. So it's going to be a great night for food, fellowship, and learning more about the local history. Again, that's February 15th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And if you do the math, you'll realize that's the day after Valentine's Day. So if you need a Valentine's Day gift, just saying. And members do get a discount on that event. And then our Lunch and Learn on February 19th, Dana Risky, who's the curator and manager out of the Uharli History Museum, will be here to talk about Uharli's African American history. In our evening lecture a month from tonight on February 27th, Gloria Calhoun will be here. Gloria is a Cartersville native and a family connected to the Summer Hill community, and she's going to come talk about the legacy and history of Summer Hill. As I mentioned earlier, if you're a member of the Bartow History Museum, and I know several of you in this room are, you get to attend those lectures for free. So if you're not a member, I encourage you to become a member tonight, and you get to go to those lectures for the full year for free. Any questions? All right. Well, without further ado, let me introduce our speaker. Donna Little is the founder of Reinhardt University's Etowah Valley Low Residency MFA program and is currently the assistant director. She's a transplant from Virginia and holds a PhD in English from the University of Virginia, an MA in Comparative Literature from UNC Chapel Hill, and an MFA in Creative Writing from the Solstice Low Residency MFA program. Her most recent essays have appeared in 5 Points, Stories South, Georgia Backroads, the James Dickey Review, and Tiferet. Recent poems have appeared in the Atlanta Review, the Florida Review, and Leaping Clear. Donna has also written many blog posts on the history and ecology of Pine Log Mountain and the Etowah River, in addition to numerous published scholarly works. Tonight, Donna will be talking about her newest historical novel called Wofford's Blood, which is the true story of James Daugherty Wofford, a Cherokee man who was a detachment leader on the Trail of Tears and an informant for the ethnologist James Moody in 1891. The white, Cherokee, and African-American Woffords lived at the foot of Pine Log Mountain, and the novel explores their lives in the years leading up to the Cherokee removal. Please join me in welcoming Donna Little.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. I had done an earlier talk here about the Wofford history. Was anybody here for that one? Okay, a few people. Do we have any Wofford descendants in the house? Yay, okay. So this is a historical novel, and all of the characters in the novel were real historical people. And I have tried in the novel to stay as close as possible to the actual historical events. However, as with any historical novel, you have to fictionalize to some extent because you can't know everything about, the daily lives of your characters. So a little bit of background about the Woffords and how I got interested in them. And then I will read you, I think, just the prologue and the first chapter, and then we can do questions and answers after that. So the Woffords were what they called back in the early 1800s an intruder family into the Cherokee Nation. So as I'm sure everybody knows, where we are right now was part of the Cherokee Nation until 1838 with the Trail of Tears. The boundaries of the Cherokee Nation had been much bigger, reaching all the way up as far as Virginia and Kentucky, but by the early 1800s it had shrunk and shrunk because the white settlers were coming in and the Cherokee were forced to make treaty after treaty after treaty. Well, by the time you get to the couple of decades before the Trail of Tears, where we are right now really was the epicenter of the Cherokee Nation. So New Echota, which was the capital of the Cherokee Nation in the last couple decades, well, at the very end it was Red Clay in Tennessee, but before that, New Echota is only 20 miles from here, and all along the Etowah River, all the way stretching from where Rome, where it becomes the Coosa, all the way up into the mountains, up to near Dahlonega. There were Cherokee people and Cherokee villages. So the Woffords ended up in what is now Bartow County. And that's how I got interested in them. I live in Rydell, really closer to Pine Log than to Rydell. But I used to see the Woffords Crossroads Baptist Church sign, for many years, and it made me wonder who were the Woffords. And then I was actually trying to write a book about Pine Log Mountain, which was another one of my passions, and a fellow researcher told me about the Woffords, and he said, well, they were a white family that intermarried with the Cherokee. And at first I was like, no, that can't be true, because half the people in Georgia think they have a Cherokee great grandmother or whatever, but for the most part it's not true. However, I realized it's truer than I had thought. So come to find out, the Woffords, like many settler families, they had started out in Virginia, migrated into the Carolinas. They were, for a time, in the very northeast corner of Georgia, almost to just across the river from South Carolina, in what's now Habersham County. And then well before the Trail of Tears, they were here in what is now Bartow County. And so the crux of the history that I've discovered is that some of the Woffords, for the most part, it was the white Wofford men marrying Cherokee women. When it came time for the Trail of Tears, some of them stayed here and basically passed as white and lived at Wofford's Crossroads, now white Georgia, for many years. Others went on the Trail of Tears. And I was just fascinated by this story that within the same family, there could be, those who stayed and those who left. My assumption had always been they all left, right? Because even like John Ross, who was the leader of the Cherokee at the time of removal, he was only 1/8 Cherokee. So my assumption was even if you were only slightly Cherokee, you left on the Trail of Tears, but that turns out to not be universally true. And I've spoken to some of the people who still go to the Wofford's Crossroads Baptist Church, and they not only do they know that they have Cherokee ancestry, but they told me that up until their grandparents' generation, there was actually visiting back and forth between the cousins out in Oklahoma in the Cherokee Nation and the Woffords who were here. So it was well known to them. And that really surprised me because I would have thought that had been a very sharp dividing line. But so I started this novel in March 2020. It was COVID. I'm a college professor. We went online in March 2020. Otherwise, I probably never would have been able to write this novel. But I did a lot of research because I'm very meticulous about, I don't want to get anything wrong historically. So luckily a lot of stuff is online now that has been scanned and placed in various online archives. But then once COVID restrictions lifted, I actually went to a lot of archives, including actually the Bartow History Museum archives, which had quite a bit of information on the Woffords. So I did probably more research than I needed to, but I want this to be a series, so I'm actually now working on the second book. So this first book, I actually had planned in the first book that I was going to get my main character, James Doherty Wofford, who was a Trail of Tears detachment leader, so he was one who went. I was going to get him on the Trail of Tears, but by the end of the first book, he's only 13 years old, so I did not get him on the Trail of Tears. However, now I'm working on book 2, and my plan is that book 2 will go till the eve of the Trail of Tears, and then book 3 is going to be the actual journey on the Trail of Tears. So part of the reason why, of all the Woffords, and I've researched all of them, but I wanted him to be my protagonist because of a couple things that I found out about him. One, that he had been a detachment leader on the Trail of Tears, and 2, that he had been, so James Mooney was a Smithsonian ethnologist who wrote the seminal book about Cherokee history and myths and culture around 1900. Well, this same guy, James Doherty Wofford, had been his main informant out in the Cherokee Nation West in Oklahoma. So in Mooney's book, there are over 200 references to things that J.D. Wofford had told him. And so that was a sort of building block for how I could create this character and know something about him. And so this main character, J.D. Wofford, he had the white Wofford father, whose name was Benjamin Wofford. When the Woffords first came to what's now Bartow County, they actually settled on Stamp Creek, and it's right where Route 20 crosses Stamp Creek. So if any of you are familiar with that, there's a little hunting check-in station. They don't use it anymore, but you can still pull in there. There's a little driveway and there's a little building. That was the original Wofford settlement, and I believe they got here about 1827, so well before the Cherokee were removed, because they were married to Cherokee. And then in the 1840s, they moved over to what's now White, Georgia, but was Wofford's Crossroads, Georgia. So my main character's father, Benjamin Wofford, is actually buried over there. His tombstone is over there, right near Stamp Creek off of Route 20. And in fact, they believe that there's a much larger cemetery that Route 20 was in fact built on top of. So there were probably other folks buried, they think like 30 to 40 graves. But interestingly, Benjamin Wofford, my main character's father, he was a Revolutionary War veteran. He was quite young during the Revolutionary War, and he was like a drummer boy or something. But I think he's one of only 2 Revolutionary War soldiers buried in Bartow County, if I'm not wrong about that. So anyway, that was the father, and he had a white wife and a son with the white wife, but he also had a Cherokee mistress, and that was the mother of my main character, James Doherty Wofford. And so when I went to write the book, thinking I was going to get much farther historically than I actually did, I really felt the need to understand, first of all, who James Doherty Wofford was, especially to understand, okay, he had the white father and the Cherokee mother, and I'd found enough evidence to show that he had gone back and forth between the two. I mean, almost like a child of divorced parents who's like, spends the summer with the dad and the winter with the mother or whatever. But that really explains a lot of who he came to be, because he was completely steeped in both Cherokee culture and white culture. And in the days leading up to the removal, he was very active in the anti-removal movement, and he was able to really go back and forth between folks who only spoke Cherokee and then people who spoke English. So he was really like in this in-between place culturally, and that's kind of what fascinated me, but what I wanted to understand. So in this, which is really book 1 of a series, I hope, is really about his childhood and exploring his Cherokee heritage and experiences, and then the white Woffords, and how he was shaped by both of these influences. So let me read you just the prologue and the first chapter, and then I'll kind of open it up to questions from you. So this book is what we call a framed novel, and the frame of it is that I pretend, this is not true, but I pretend that I discovered the transcripts of the interviews that James Mooney, the ethnologist, did with James Doherty Wofford. And so the whole book is structured where each chapter is an interview. And so JD, that's what he went by, is JD. He is talking directly to Mooney and, explaining his experiences to Mooney. So I wrote a prologue, and I'll read you this. It's just a couple pages. Of a fictional moment when I went to the Smithsonian and supposedly discovered these transcripts, which I did not. But the way I wrote it, a lot of people have said, "Oh, wow, that's so cool how you found the transcripts in the Smithsonian." I'm like, no, I made that up. Yeah. Okay, so here's the prologue. National Anthropological Archive, Smithsonian Museum, 2022. We don't know where we live. Whose feet walked the land beneath our own feet? Who labored here, who gave birth here, who died here? Whose bones lay buried beneath our very houses? That was the thought that led me to this poorly lit room in the basement of the Smithsonian's National Anthropological Archives, waiting for the fussy clerk to bring out a box. I live in a little North Georgia town called White. It used to be called Wofford's Crossroads, and I began to wonder Who were the Woffords? This part is true. The town is at the foot of Pine Log Mountain, the southernmost mountain in the Appalachian chain. I knew there'd been a Cherokee village nearby. I'd hiked the mountain many times, trying to picture the people who lived here until they were removed on the Trail of Tears in 1838. I started digging around in the files of the local historical society, looking for information on the Woffords, and what I discovered astounded me. The Woffords were part Cherokee. They were a notorious white intruder family who had intermarried with Cherokee women. When the removal came, some of them embraced their Cherokee identity and went on the trail. Others passed as white and remained in Georgia. One brother went and another brother stayed. One cousin went, other cousins stayed. One of the Woffords who left was James Doherty Wofford, who led a detachment on the Trail of Tears and who in 1891 was an informant for Smithsonian ethnologist James Mooney. Mooney's Myths of the Cherokee, 1900, is considered the seminal collection of Cherokee lore. Mooney was the son of poor Irish immigrants, a self-taught journalist who earned the trust of several Native American tribes and produced detailed catalogs of their languages and cultures. In 1887 and 1888, he interviewed several Cherokee elders in the Cherokee Nation East in North Carolina, the remnant of Cherokee who stayed behind when most were forced to walk the 1,000 miles to Oklahoma. In 1891, he traveled to the Cherokee Nation West in Oklahoma and interviewed only one elder, James Doherty Wofford, who was by then about 90 years old. Mooney's famous book provides hundreds of tantalizing references to JD's life and personality. It was clear that he had a deep knowledge of the sacred stories and rituals of the Cherokee, and he had also been part of the dramatic events of the 1820s and 1830s leading up to the trail. And this is all true. The only untrue part of this is when I say that I found the transcripts. I also found out something else about the Woffords, something that stunned and fascinated me. The great African-American novelist Toni Morrison was born Chloe Wofford, and her father, George Wofford, was from Georgia, a descendant of the slaves of the same Woffords who founded Wofford's Crossroads. What was the story of these intertwined white Cherokee and black Woffords? What kind of lives had they lived here in Georgia prior to the removal and then out in Oklahoma in the Cherokee Nation West? I discovered that the Smithsonian National Anthropological Archives had a collection of James Mooney's papers, and I flew from Georgia to Washington, D.C. to look at them. This is where it gets fictional. I carefully filed out the request slip for file 2497. Actually, this does exist, but I don't think it, and I haven't seen it, but I don't think it has the transcripts. The Cherokee Notes of James Mooney. The clerk emerges from the secret labyrinths of the archives, not with a box, but with a cart loaded with 6 or 7 boxes. He wheels it over to the table where I wait. There's a lot, he says, pushing his glasses back on his nose. I think this will take you more than one day. He hefts a box off the cart and onto the table. I pull on those white cotton gloves they make you wear in archives so you don't smudge anything. I lift the gray cardboard lid, and that mildewy smell of old books and papers fills the air. I have the feeling that I am the first person to open this box in over 100 years. I pull out the first leather-bound journal. On the very first page, Mooney has scrawled, "Interview with James Doherty Wofford, March 13th, 1891, Tahlequah, Oklahoma, Cherokee Nation West." So that's the setup for the whole thing. And then I'll read you a bit from the first chapter. So it starts in 1812. JD was born in, it's disputed when he was born. I think he was born in 1802, so he's 10 years old. And this chapter is actually based on a whole story that he told James Mooney about witnessing the Cherokee ghost dance. And so that's where I started, because he told Mooney that when he was 10 years old, the Cherokee prophet Solly and the ghost dancers came through where he was staying with his mother. And he told a very elaborate story about it. So basically this first chapter is really based on that. So his mother lived in what they call the Valley Towns, which is, if you know where Murphy, North Carolina is this is the area that I'm talking about. Okay. Chapter 1, the ghost dance. Interview 1. So each chapter I say like interview 1, interview 2, and I give the date, which again is fictional. Although I did find out the exact dates that Mooney was there, and I used the actual dates that Mooney was there because I'm like that, but I made up the transcripts. Interview 1, James Mooney and James Doherty Wofford, March 13th, 1891, Tahlequah, Oklahoma, Cherokee Nation, West. And then at the beginning of every chapter, I put in italics Mooney's notes, where Mooney is describing JD and what JD as an old man is doing. So Mooney's notes. J.D. Wofford is 89 years old, born in 1802 in Franklin County, Georgia, at Wofford's settlement to a Cherokee mother and a white father, a leader in the anti-removal movement and a conductor on the Trail of Tears, a traditionalist and an abolitionist. That's another reason I was drawn to J.D. Wofford, was because he also was very anti-slavery, which I found interesting. Affiliated with the secret Kiowa Society. Fought for the Union in the Civil War. He was like 60 at that time. A close friend of Baptist missionaries Evan Jones and his son John Butrick Jones. And that's a big part of the story, not so much in book 1, but in what I'm writing right now. He went to the Baptist mission and was very close with the Baptist missionaries, who actually were fierce advocates for the Cherokee and walked the Trail of Tears with them because they were that devoted to their Cherokee friends. Speaks perfect English and has often served as a translator. Wofford is a small man, short and wiry. This I got from, I'm in touch with his 5 times great-granddaughter out in Oklahoma, and she's given me a lot of their family lore and family documents and stuff. And supposedly he was only 5 feet tall, so I went with it. He wears a European-style white-collared shirt, dark trousers, and dark jacket, a bowler hat with a single white feather, the tip dyed red, a sash around his neck with traditional Cherokee beadwork, red, blue, and white, curlicue designs, almost like a question mark with cross designs at each end. On his left lapel, a pair of crossed pins. Thick, wavy white hair spilling down his shoulders, bushy white eyebrows, droopy white mustache, and a spade-shaped beard. Nut brown skin creased like a map that has been folded and unfolded many times. Eyes heavily lidded, almost closed, like a sleeping turtle. But when he looks at you, his eyes are a startling blue. And that's another detail that the family shared with me, is that according to their family lore, he had brown skin, but he had blue eyes. I am interviewing the subject in his home. From the outside, it is a rough log cabin, but the inside is like a museum. The walls are lined with art objects, old tools, old weapons, a dozen turkey fans, the feathers artfully spread. Shelves hold rows of gleaming ceramic pots, tools hanging on pegs, an axe, an awl, mallets, baskets, muskets, bows, blowguns, stickball sticks. On the table are a clay pipe and a cane flute. Wofford shuffles over to the hearth of a big stone fireplace and throws a log on the fire. And then this is where JD starts talking. I'll read you a few pages of this, but I'll make sure I leave some time for question and answers. So he starts out, I keep the fire. Someone has to. I carried the same fire all the way from Kiowa to Oklahoma. My wife died on the trail. Her mother died. My niece died. So many died on that journey. The only thing I saved was the fire. And this is actually true. I read this, not necessarily that he had carried it, but I did read for the Cherokee, they have a sacred fire that never stops burning, and it's in a sacred place in what's now North Carolina. But they carried the embers of that fire all the way to Oklahoma. So I just made it that he was the person who did this. The fire, the only thing I saved was the fire, that and the stories. As long as the fire burns and the stories are told, there will be a Cherokee people. I think the Creator kept me alive to tell this story. Who will tell this tale, he asked, in that booming God voice of his. "Send me," I said. "I'll go." And he seared my tongue with the living coal. I've been left here to witness that these things really happened, and my testimony is true. Another thing, just to interrupt myself again, is that he did actually, as I said, he went to the Cherokee, to the Baptist mission school, and he became a Baptist preacher. And that was another thing that really fascinated me too, is he was very traditionalist with the Cherokee customs, but he also was very active as a Baptist. And that surprised me, but I learned that's actually very common and among Cherokee people and other Native Americans, that they retain their cultural traditions, but they still practice Christianity. So you see sometimes where he refers to the Bible, it's because he was steeped in the Bible as well as the Cherokee traditions. If you want to know where the trail started, it started for me with the ghost dance. That was 79 years ago, the year 1812. I was 10 years old, living with my mother and my stepfather Ebenezer in a cabin on a hill above the Valley River. That's North Carolina now, but in 1812, that was the heart of the Cherokee Nation. I never liked Ebenezer much. The man was a drunk, and he turned my mama into a drunk. Or maybe she already was, I can't say. My father was also fond of his liquor. Ebenezer farmed a few acres of corn, but really it was her that worked it. He found himself a good Cherokee woman, a farming woman, and she worked for him. And at night they drank from that jug, and I went outside and studied the stars. It was about dusk one day in March. Ebenezer and Mama were inside, and I had been going my solitary way, hunting squirrels and whatnot in the foothills. I roamed all over those mountains by myself. The forest was thick there, chestnut trees so big that 10 people holding hands couldn't reach all the way around. Stands of spruce so tall you couldn't see the top, thickets of rhododendron along every creek. So many birds that the sky grew dark with the great cloud of wings, and the air was loud with the thunder of their flapping. Everywhere I went, I carried my blowgun and my dagger and the flute my uncle made for me. I was a good shot with a blowgun. Any meat in that cabin came from me. The rabbits and possums I shot, or the fish I caught in the river. I'd climb Peachtree Bald, trying to catch a glimpse of the Nunahee, the spirit people who lived in the mountains. Sometimes I'd hear their songs and drums, and I'd try to match their melodies on my flute as I went my lonely way. Sometimes I'd catch a quick glimpse of them before they faded into the trees. Such a green place, so alive, the seen and the unseen. The rocks sang and the trees whispered secrets. The wolves gave us music every morning from their high dens. The stories that I will tell you, they are not just the stories of the people, they are the stories of the land. Everything about the land has spirit. We call them the tree people, the rock people, the animal people. That is why we say Nigada de Donna Little, that's Cherokee, I can't pronounce it. Respect all things. When we were torn from the land, from everything that made us who we are, we were allowed only what we could carry on our back or in a wagon. But it was the weightless things that were the heaviest. Songs and prayers and dances and the embers of the sacred fire. From this, we have remade ourselves like a pruned tree that grows back even when you've cut it to the nub. The day of the ghost dance, I'd been off in the woods somewhere, and when I got back to the cabin, I looked down the road, and here came a great band of people walking up the hill, some still crossing the river at the ford. I'd never seen so many people in my life. That cabin was the only road in the gap between the mountains that we call Gulachetsi Mountains, what the whites called the Smoky Mountains. You took that road to the sacred places, Kauai, Kituwa, Nikwasi, Cowie. We were used to a few travelers coming through, but never anything like this. I called to my mother and Ebenezer to come out and see, and Ebenezer stumbled out with his musket, a musket that never hit anything except maybe a wall when he was drunk. There had to be 100 people, and they were wearing deerskin tunics and breechcloths, even though it was windy moon, Anuyi, still cold. Sometimes you saw mountain Cherokee wearing deerskin, but most people I knew wore white clothes even if they didn't speak a lick of English. I was wearing a wool shirt and breeches, and I was still cold. They were coming from the southwest, and the sun was setting over the river, pink and purple, and the first trees were blooming, the peach trees my mother had planted near the cabin, and the white sarvis and the purple red buds. When you saw those trees bloom, that was when you knew there'd be no more snow, and it was safe to cross the mountain roads, safe to bury the winter dead. It was a sight, those people climbing the hill, wet and singing in the cold dusk. They walked with a dance in their step. At the front walked a man with the confidence of a chief, but not dressed like a chief. He wore only a deerskin breechcloth. Like many who followed the old ways, his head was shaved, except for a long top knot with a red eagle feather attached. That usually meant a war chief, but he led a band of men, women, and children, not warriors. The people were singing a song I'd never heard before, and I knew a lot of songs. Even though I'd lived with my father's people in the Wofford settlement until I was 7, and my mother ran off with Ebenezer, I always spent the winters hunting with my mother's uncles. They taught me the old ways. My grandfather's cousin, Yonaguska, he was a medicine man. He'd learned it from his father, and he taught me the medicine ways. This song I'd never heard. They were singing something like this. On Kauai he will meet us, dressed in light he comes. The old ways are restored. The land is ours. The land is ours. I knew what Kauai was, what the whites call Clingman's Dome, the tallest mountain in the Smokies. Yonaguska had told me stories of the bears that held council there and the enchanted lake, Atagahi, but I didn't know who they thought would meet them on the mountain unless it was the great white bear. Ebenezer was griping, asking, "What are they carrying on for?" He didn't speak Cherokee, even though he'd lived among us for many years and was married to a Cherokee woman. Ebenezer always spoke in anger. The world seemed to exist to make him mad. I explained to him they were singing about Kauai and a god who would come and bring back the old ways. Ebenezer just grunted and said, "Fat chance of that." He was clinging to that old useless musket. Are they dangerous, he wanted to know? He was wearing that moth-eaten beaver hat of his, and his beard looked like a bird might have nested in it. They don't have any weapons, I told him. It's women and children, nothing to worry about. I'm going to stop in a minute, but I at least want to get to the description of, this is a true thing that happened, that this group is led by a prophet named Sali, and there were a lot of movements in the early 1800s of Native Americans who felt that they were being called back to practice their old ways again, because they had, with the fur trade especially, they had kind of made a bargain with white culture, which then was not working out very well for them. And so they had a lot of prophets who were kind of advising, no, we need to purify ourselves and go back to the old ways. So let me just read the description of the prophet, and then I'll quit and see if you guys have some questions. I am Sali, the leaders said, in Cherokee, of course. We are on the road to Kauai. I asked permission to camp on your land. He was formal like that, like everything was a ceremony. He took himself pretty seriously, old Sali. I saw that he had a red scarf around his neck and a weasel skin pouch, dyed white, hanging from a leather cord. I knew the Atawayu, the powerful magicians, carried white quartz crystals in a pouch like that. The most powerful was an Ulsvada, the white star from the forehead of the Uktana, the great serpent. A man had to fight with the Uktana to get it, pluck it from his head. Only very holy men had such a stone. Sali had a tattoo of a water spider on his arm, very big and fancy, and face paint black and red around his eyes, a smear of white on his cheeks. He had a long beak of a nose, and his eyes were dark and bright at the same time, lit from within, the eyes of a true believer. And what goes on to happen in this first chapter is that JD joins the dance of the ghost dance people, and he feels a longing to join them, but at the same time he feels like he doesn't belong, and it's that whole being torn between two cultures. And then in the next chapter they're doing a ceremony in the river, and there's a slight earthquake, which is true. There was actually a huge earthquake in 1811, 1812 from the Midwest to the East Coast. The river is like sloshing all over the place. A little boy almost drowns, and then JD has to swim under, to the bottom of the river, and he rescues the boy. And then Solly, the prophet, I'm particularly fond of this part, so that's why I want to read to you. Solly the prophet says, "What is your name, boy?" And JD says, "I could not make any words come out of my mouth. Finally, I said, James Doherty Wilcox. I lied to the prophet. Wilcox was Ebenezer's last name. I could not tell him my name was Wofford. I could not tell him who I was. I did not have my Cherokee name yet, only the baby name my mother called me. I glanced at my mother, and she nodded ever so slightly. James Doherty Wilcox, he said, and he looked at me with those eyes that seemed to bless and damn. He handed me the singed bundle of tobacco. May your life be long upon this earth, he said. But then, when a month later, Solly and the people are coming back from the sacred mountain, and he says, so Solly, JD and Solly see each other one more time, and Solly says, Yowah, that's what they call God. Yowah has spoken. He told me things I cannot say. He showed me the unspeakable road that we must travel. I saw you on this road. I saw you in the snow, and you were weeping. What could this mean? I said, for I was a boy and dearly loved. I knew no sorrow. We will meet again, Solly said. Wofford. And so Solly, because he's a prophet, he knows everything, he figured out that his name was Wofford, but he speaks this prophecy that JD is going to walk the unspeakable road, and this haunts JD for many years until the Trail of Tears comes, and he's like, oh, okay, this is what Solly meant. This is the unspeakable road. So that kind of gives you a flavor for the book. So, questions about either the history aspect of it or my research or my writing or the book, just anything that you're wondering? Yes?
The language, the meter and everything in that, how much of that did you actually find in your research?
Most of that is me. So as far as like the main part or the Cherokee prayers?
Well, like when they're talking about the bear.
That's me. Yeah, no, that's me. So I started out as a poet, and so this is my first novel, and so this is my first novel, yeah. But I think I bring my kind of poetic sensibility to the way that I write the novel. But as far as like the prayers and everything, I did a ton of research because I wanted to use actual Cherokee prayers. And I do intersperse some Cherokee words, even though I do not. It's one of my goals to learn Cherokee, but I don't know it yet. But I felt like it was important to put it in there to, give the authenticity of the language.
Did your publisher use the Cherokee alphabet?
No, they did not. Yeah, and I should have mentioned this is Mercer University Press published this, and they have been wonderful. I've loved them. They publish a lot of books about Georgia, and they've just been really supportive of this project. So yeah, they've been great. What other questions? You gotta have some questions.
This is really good. I was just sad when I stopped reading.
Well, you have to buy the book. I know Trey has some, I have some. Yes.
Where would be the original part of Wofford's Crossroads?
So that's a great question. Okay, so 411 now is roughly follows what was originally called the Tennessee Road, but it's actually about an eighth of a mile east of where the original Tennessee Road was. So if you drive through the town of White, the Tennessee Street that goes through White, that road has been there. That was originally a Native American trail. That road has been there for hundreds of years. And so the original Wofford's Crossroads was, I don't know how familiar you are with the area, but where Richards Road crosses Tennessee Street, that intersection was the original Wofford's Crossroads. And so I'm very eager to get to the part where they move there, because that's, sort of like my home territory. But JD's cousin Jimmy, who is his best friend, he was James Whitney Wofford, and James Whitney Wofford married Altha McCracken, and they were the original ones that lived there, as well as another brother, Thomas Jefferson Wofford. So, but the thing I haven't figured out that I really want to know is which, if any, of the houses at that intersection were theirs, and I do not know. I need to look at the land lot numbers. I think I can figure it out, but I haven't yet figured it out. But yeah.
The Cassville Cemetery is so interesting with the whole section of Woffords.
Yes, and see, there's another set of Woffords that were in Cassville, and it's really complicated, but I'll try to explain it. So Benjamin, the Revolutionary War soldier who was JD's father, with his white wife, he had one son. That son had a son. That son's name was William Tatum Wofford. He went on to become a very famous general, William Tatum Wofford. He lived in Cassville. He was not part Cherokee, but he was JD's, I don't know what you call it, JD's half-brother's son, whatever that is. Yes. Yeah, so there's a whole branch of those Woffords. But these Woffords were all very, very close to each other. Like they all were, moved with each other from Habersham to here, and just, they were one of the first white families in this area, if not the first white family in this area. Yeah.
And you have to crawl through the woods to see that grave.
I know, which is a shame, I think.
But it's also a shame that, they redid the tombstone.
Yes, I know, yes. And I never saw the original. I've only seen I've seen pictures of it, but yeah. No, somebody needs to pay for the archaeology to, figure out what other graves are there, and, because you shouldn't be able to put roads over but I mean, all kinds of things happen, like when Lake Allatoona was made, they flooded a lot of.
There might even be some across the street.
There are, supposedly, yes. Yes. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
My curiosity, what part of Habersham County were they?
If you know where Clarksville is, very close to Clarksville. Actually, Currahee Mountain, if you're familiar with Currahee Mountain, that was the northmost point of the Wofford settlement that was there. So yeah, roughly that area. And then Toccoa, some of them moved to Toccoa after that.
That's got me curious too, because there's a whole bunch of Indian sacred sites in that area.
Yes, that's it. Yes, exactly, and that's
down the Soapy River and all that.
Right, and in the book, that's part of what I tried to do was, not that I know all of that, but I did try to, as much as I could, put what I could find in there of that. Yeah, there's a little bit of mysticism in the book. It's mostly reality based, but the great white bear does make several appearances, and I tried to make it so the reader could decide whether they really believed it was the great white bear or not, because some people are not going to think that something like that could happen, but I like to think that the great white bear could show up. So yeah.
How was your research enhanced by a visit to the local archives?
Well, so it turned out, this is amazing. So it turned out that Bartow History Museum has a folder this thick on the Woffords. I mean, it was just like incredible. And the best thing I found was there, for some reason, I don't know how this even happened, but in that folder, there was a page where in the 1960s, one of the white Woffords had interviewed one of the black Woffords, who was a descendant of the enslaved Woffords. Well, it turns out that this guy, the black Wofford, was Toni Morrison's uncle. I mean, before anybody, knew that she was going to become Toni Morrison and become famous or whatever, and this guy gave a very detailed account of their genealogy, which to me was just mind-blowing, because what I did try to do, I don't know, I'm not going to say I'm 100% right, but I was pretty much able to piece together, using that and then using census records and will records, what I'm pretty sure is Toni Morrison's Wofford genealogy. And so if I am right, if my theory is correct, her ancestor did live at Wofford's Crossroads. So, so it's just, to me, fascinating. Yeah. And so in the first book, there's JD has two best friends. One is Jimmy, who went on to marry Alta McCracken and live in what's now White. The other is Toni, who was a slave and who is, by my accounting, the ancestor of Toni Morrison, which is really funny because in the will, his name is Tony, right? So I didn't say, oh, he's the ancestor of Toni Morrison, so I'm going to call him Tony. No, he was Tony. So, yeah. And so no, with a Y. But part of my quest in writing the sequels is to also trace that family line. So I'm trying to trace sort of like the white Woffords, the Cherokee Woffords, and the black Woffords over the 19th century, basically. Yeah.
And just a quick addition to that question is, wasn't it true that the long-serving director of the depot here was a Wofford?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and I don't know, you said you're a Wofford descendant. Are you from that line? So it was Chuck Wofford, whose full name was James Charles Wofford, and he was in charge of the Western and Atlantic Railroad depot here in the second half of the 19th century, basically.
He was also mayor at one point.
Yes. What's interesting about him is that he was the son of one of the Woffords who moved to Florida, I think because depending upon their skin tone, I think there were some who could pass as white and some who could less pass as white. So Chuck Wofford's father had gone down to Florida, which at the time was sort of like a wild place. I think he married a Cherokee woman too, actually, but I don't know that for sure. But anyway, his son, that guy's name was John Thomas. Of his kid, they all had like 10 kids, but Chuck was the only one who came back here and hung out with the rest of the Woffords that were still here. And then he became a very prominent citizen in Bartow County. So yes, he is going to be, if I can get that far, if I live that long, he is going to be one of my characters in like book 5. Because I'm kind of fascinated by him. Yes. And see, Toni Morrison's father and grandfather worked for the Western and Atlantic Railroad. And my theory about that is that the black Woffords and the white Woffords still had a lot of interconnection. So, yeah. So if I get to book 5, we'll find out.
Very cool.
Any other questions? All right. What's been
the reaction from the family, the descendants of the Woffords? All of your work and research.
I mean, mostly enthusiasm. I mean, and especially the Cherokee descendants that I've talked to or that I've been in contact with, because I haven't met the ones that are out in Oklahoma. I haven't met them face to face, but I mean, they've just been so happy to find out about all of this, because for the Cherokee people, I mean, they don't know a lot about what their ancestors were doing here or how they lived or anything, because they were really so cut off. So yeah, they've been just really, really interested and supportive, which has been really nice. Yeah. And I actually went to a Black Wofford reunion at Wofford College in South Carolina, and they were really interested and excited as well. Because I mean, what I found is like people want to know their history, and if someone's going to do all the work to figure that out, they're happy. So yeah.
When you find connections that are far away, that's the work you need.
Yeah.
That's the help you need.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Have you done much with genetics?
No, the only way that I've touched on that is, and this will not come as a surprise, but the Black Woffords have done their DNA and discovered DNA connections with the white Woffords and the Cherokee Woffords, which is no surprise, historically. But it is interesting that, and that's why I'm trying to write about all three branches, because really they were, they're, not only were their lives intertwined, but they were actually related. So, yeah.
Cool.
All right, well, thank you so much. I know the museum has books. I have some books. I can sign books.
Thank you, Donna. I was going to mention, we'll give a plug, we do have books for sale, and she will sign them.
Yes, absolutely.
We will keep the museum open for a little bit longer if you want to see the temporary exhibit, or upstairs to see the permanent exhibits.
Yeah.
I'll also mention, I didn't mention this in my upcoming program announcements, but in March, our lunch is on in March, the third Wednesday of March. Somebody tell me that real quick. March something. Whatever the third Wednesday of March is. Jeff Bishop from the Funk Heritage Center at Reinhardt will be here to talk about the Fort Meade, which was a Cherokee removal fort here in Bartow County, and the work he's done to research that and tell us about the history of that removal fort.
Very cool.
So just sort of 19th, thank you. March 19th at noon here.
Was that the one that JB was checking out this way out, almost to Rome?
Oh, almost to Rome. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you again, Donna.
All right, thank you. Thank you.